Welcome, my dear Divyavani viewers. Welcome to this program, especially where I was narrating to you about the missionary journeys of St. Paul and after that of St. Thomas, how Thomas came to India and preached, established Christian communities. I, in the last talk, gave some mention about some of the records that are there in the various writings of the church fathers in the earliest centuries, because that gives us an indication that Thomas' work in India was known to the whole church, especially in the East. The Syrian church was very closely connected with the church in India. The church in Edessa or Mesopotamia was closely linked to the Christian community in Kerala, and that gives us some information about the works of St. Thomas. At that time, the jurisdiction of India was under Edessa. Edessa or Mesopotamia had a patriarchate, and that patriarchate actually guided, supervised the church in Kerala. The Mesopotamian patriarchate was at a place called Seleucia Ctesiphon, and later it was shifted to Baghdad and Mosul. However it is that patriarchate that looked after the church in India. There was a Christian settlement at a place called Socotra, which also gives us some indication that the church was actually spread, not only limited to Kerala, but to Arabia. In Kerala, I already mentioned, Thomas seemed to have converted about 17,000 people. He did not limit it to any particular caste. All the castes seem to have been touched, but then there was no caste distinction within the church. The Christian communities were practically all along the banks of the river Periyar or its tributaries. The lake, especially the lake into which many rivers empty, 6 major rivers of Kerala empty into that particular lake, and there were Jewish settlements all along that area, and Thomas seemed to have visited many of them. It is that made St. Thomas actually convert many in this particular area. The early Christians in the early century itself seem to have made crosses of granite, and from something like the 5th century these crosses are seen, and wherever they erected such crosses they became pilgrimage centers, lot of people visiting those areas, and such granite huge crosses are still existing, and many churches have these in front of the church, and that is called the St. Thomas cross. There is one particular report about this particular type of cross, and that report also mentions the name, that is St. Thomas cross. The relics of St. Thomas were taken to Edessa in the year 232 or maybe 290s. So in any case, in the 3rd century, the relics were taken to Edessa. And from Edessa, practically all the relics were there. Only a few are taken back to India, to Mylapore, to the Church of St. Thomas. The Indian king named Mazdai, that is the Syriac source name, whereas the same name in Greek is called Misdeus, and in Latin the same name is seen as Misdeus. In any case, there was a particular king. His name was spelt in so many different ways. Most likely it was the king whose name was Vasudeva the First, and there are coins minted by that particular king, and some coins are still existing. A martyrologist called Rabban Sliba also gives a lot of details about the martyrdom of St. Thomas, and the family that was connected with St. Thomas was the family of an Indian king. I'll quote from that particular writing of Rabban Sliba in Latin: Coronatio Tome Apostoli et Misdeus Rex Indiae Johannes eius filius huiusque mater tertia. Coronation of Thomas the Apostle and Misdeus, King of India, together with his son Johannes, thought to be a Latinization of Vijan. That much of a written document is there which gives a clear indication and proof to the work of St. Thomas here. After a short stay in a Greek island called Chios, his relics were taken to Ortona in Italy. At present, those relics are in Ortona. The King Gondophares, about whom I mentioned, also gives some indication that he was called by Thomas and perhaps even converted. There is an inscription on the coin of Gondophares: Maharajasa Mahastasa Tratarasa Deva Pradasa Gondopharasa Sarasa. That is on the coin of the king Gondophares. He perhaps has this writing, and there is a blessing symbol on the coin. Whatever it is, St. Thomas seems to have touched this kingly family. In Kerala, as I already explained and narrated, Thomas reached in AD 52. He seems to have landed in Kodungallur at present. That is the place that we consider as the place of Thomas. But the real place of Mudziris is perhaps a few kilometers away from Kodungallur. In any case, the area is something that is noteworthy. That is the last end of the river Periyar, where Periyar empties itself into the Arabian Sea. So that is the connection between the Arabian Sea and the river Periyar. Most likely the ships reached Busiris from the ocean, from the Arabian Sea, and through the river Periyar, just a couple of kilometers, and reached Muziris. Archaeologists are still trying to dig out and find some relics, some proof for the port of Fr.Puthussery. In the year 441, one particular Anatolius has a certain record that he donated a silver coffin to host the relics of St. Thomas. And in 1144, this city was conquered by the Zengids and the shrine was destroyed. But they actually, though destroyed the church, have left an interesting proof that Thomas was there. We'll have a short break. We'll come back after a few minutes. Welcome back. I was narrating to you some of the mentions in the sacred writings of the fathers of the church. The last one I mentioned was in the year 441, when a silver coffin was donated to house the relics of St. Thomas. In the year 522, a certain Alexandrian called Cosmas Indicopleustes visited the Malabar coast. He is the first traveler who mentions the name Syrian Christians in Malabar. In his book Christian Topography, he mentions this particular phrase, Syrian Christians of Malabar. There is also a mention of the town or village called Kalyana, which should be actually either Kollam or Koilon, and there a certain bishop from Persia is consecrated. Metropolitan Maraprem writes, most church historians who doubt the tradition of the doubting Thomas in India will admit there was a church in India in the middle of the 6th century when Cosmas Indicopleustes visited India. His visit and his recordings are interesting. There was a Christian community and he links it with Syria, and that is how they are called the Syrian Christians. There is a copper plate granting land to one Iravi Kortan, a Christian of Kodungallur, by King Veeraragava. The date is more or less the middle of the 8th century, 744 or so, which shows that there were strong Christians, also wealthy and influential Christians in that area. In 822, two Nestorian Persian bishops, Mar Sapor and Mar Peroz, came to Malabar to occupy their seats in Kollam and Kodungallur. That must have given the Christian community a Nestorian coloring, and that was perhaps the reason why the Christians in Kerala were at one stage considered as Nestorians. There were also other reasons for that, because in Kerala the Christians were not following the Roman system. They were under the Syrian system, Syrian Mesopotamian Patriarchate, and therefore the liturgy and the canonical practices were from Mesopotamia. Marco Polo, the Venetian traveler, and who has written a famous book called Il Milione, he visited South India towards the end of the 13th century, 1280 or 1290, somewhere there. He first went to China, then he went to Sri Lanka and reached Kerala. In Sri Lanka, he seems to have found the tomb of Adam. Rather strange, but that's also interesting. He visited Kerala, especially Kollam, that is in the south. He visited the Malabar coast and met the Syrian Christians. And he has recorded various traditions of the St. Thomas Christians or Syrian Christians. He gives the record of the tomb of St. Thomas, and the book Il Milione became actually a very popular reading, though it was considered as only fabulous, only stories, pious stories and so on. But still people used to read it because it was something interesting for people, especially because it was a traveler's report, and apparently Marco Polo dictated this book on his journey back to Europe. The Indian tradition, in which elements of the traditions of the Malabar, Coromandel and Persian church intermingled firmly, and that is seen in the practice of the Christians, especially at Mylapore. The mortal remains which were reburied in the town of Mylapore and is regularly visited is a place of great pilgrimage. Although no archaeological evidence is seen for any burial there, but still people believe that is where St. Thomas was buried. On September 27, 2006, when the Holy Father, Pope Benedict XVI, recalled an ancient tradition, I quote, an ancient tradition claims that Thomas first evangelized Syria and Persia, and that is mentioned by Origen. According to Eusebius of Caesarea in the Ecclesiastical History number 3, then Thomas went on to the west to Western India, from where also he finally reached Southern India. This is a statement by the Holy Father made in 2006. As I already hinted at, there are many early Christian writings which mention Thomas' mission and work in India. After the first Ecumenical Council of 325, there are so many recordings where Thomas is mentioned. I will just mention a few so that you get an idea of the way the church at that time really regarded Thomas as the Apostle of India. The Acts of Thomas, the full name is Acts of Judas Thomas, which were written in the 2nd or 3rd century. The Acts mention that when they cast lots where the apostles should go, apparently lot fell on Thomas to go to Parthia or India. Both are more or less same. And Thomas was unwilling because it was hard, but then the Indo-Parthian kingdom that was in the northwestern India was already known, and it was ruled by Greek satraps, Greek leaders, and that might have been the descendants of Alexander the Great. And that made Thomas work in that particular area. As I already mentioned, at present all that we have is a small Christian community in Kurdistan. Otherwise, practically no Christian communities are seen in the northwest India. Even that little hint with all these actually tells us Thomas must have gone there. If not, there will not be so many indications regarding Thomas' visit and work in that particular area. The way Thomas traveled must have been really hard. The way he traveled must have been so hard, but still he did all that, and the work that he did really bore fruit, especially because of the blessings Jesus showered on this community. The casting of lots for the area of work is mentioned by Eusebius, quoting Origen. So that also must have been something true. If not, these two great people would not quote this particular event. We have no other indication that they cast lots in order to decide where to work. But since these two mention this, maybe that has some value. The Christians followed the apostolic way. They appointed leaders, they appointed priests, they appointed elders. And in that way, Christian community was preserved, continued. I'll stop with this. Thank you for listening to me. May God bless you.